Traé Brooks is an interdisciplinary artist based in Providence, Rhode Island, originally from Windsor, Connecticut. Earning a bachelor's degree in fine art from the University of Hartford in 2019, his work explores familiar relationships, spirituality, and the collective experience by utilizing various mediums such as painting, sculpture, metal fabrication, and installation. Throughout the years, he has participated in group exhibitions and solo shows, as well as residencies and fellowship programs like the Farmington Valley Arts Center in Avon, Connecticut, the Steelyard here in Providence, and briefly served as a board member and chair of curatorial at the Windsor Arts Center in Windsor, Connecticut. Currently, Brooks contributes to the arts community as a security guard at the Risen Museum. So take it away, Traé.
Okay, perfect. So everyone should see that. Just gonna get started. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I'm just gonna like jump right in. So like MJ mentioned earlier, I originally from Connecticut. I also just want to kind of briefly go over my background, just to kind of give a little bit of context of where I'm coming from and kind of what brought me to the Steelyard. So from Connecticut, I went to art school at University of Hartford, where I studied painting. So originally my background was mostly in 2D, and a lot of my undergrad work was focused on sort of my personal history, background, and just like people that were close to me. And even though, so like this, just some examples of work I've done undergrad. And I think really early on, even though primarily I was focused on 2D, there were some sculptural elements that I started adding as well, such as like fabrics, like uh, sewing other canvas onto each other, and just like incorporating other objects as well. So like very early on, like I started kind of there there were some 3D aspects that were kind of like making their way into the work. And then kind of see that in like post undergrad. So like immediately after I graduated, kind of like um still playing with that sort of sculptural element, but still keeping it primarily 2D. And then yeah, just some more examples. Also like utilizing like found objects like mirrors, any sort of furniture pieces or anything like I can really kind of get my hands on, and that really spoke to me. So like a lot of that. And then right around 2020, I became a member at Makerspace CT in Hartford, and which is pretty much like a space for makers, manufacturers, entrepreneurs to like kind of um who like specialize in like machining, 3D printing, woodworking. And that's pretty much how I got involved with or how I was first introduced to welding. So I took a few courses, like beginner courses, and then from then on, like my I guess direction sort of changed where I started focusing more on metal fabrication and just like experimenting in general with metalwork. And then just going to show like some early examples. A lot of it is like super rough, as you can see, where I was very much just kind of like taking scrap material and just like kind of hot gluing them together just to kind of see like what kind of forms I could make. Uh, Still working with the figure, but just like kind of being very playful with it. And also like a massive range in scale. So like certain pieces like before where I was doing kind of full scale bodies like the kneeling piece and then this one here and then would also do like tabletop like the heads and then also like playing around with like laser cutting and things like that too. And it was like right around this time where I didn't really have like a real sort of working concept for uh these metal pieces. It was mostly just me kind of developing these skills and kind of learning what I can and cannot get away with as far as like working with metal. So like just like some more examples of like kind of and also like kind of bouncing around between sculptural and as well as like still hang on a bit to 2D or like flat plane pieces. And then these ones here, I was also experimenting with slag, which is basically like the sort of molten iron from like I guess like at the time, just like laser cut or well, laser cutting as well as like using the torch and then just like kind of getting like those little pieces that kind of melted off. And I would kind of take these and like glue them onto paper. So I kind of look at these as like drawings. So this is like another example of like me kind of experimenting with the material as well as like um having like an interest or being drawn to industrial waste and like discarded material. And even though I wasn't fully aware of it at the time, like I was very much drawn to like that sort of history, like of like things that were kind of either tossed aside or just like or just things that you normally wouldn't kind of utilize as far as art making was concerned. And so I was pretty much a member. So I was a member at Makerspace for about 3 years, kind of developing and learning a lot about metal fab. And that very much became like the foundation of um, kind of like the work leading into the steel yard. And it was like around that time where I started looking at different residencies in different shops. And eventually that's how I did discover the steel yard, where I would be there for about 2 years, or I would do like a program, the residency program for 2 years. So pretty much during my first year at the steel yard, I kind of came in with like no expectation of like what to make or anything like that, which kind of alleviated like a lot of pressure to like kind of make something kind of mind-blowing, I guess. My main focus was to kind of continue developing uh, metalworking, and then also the main objective that I had was to achieve a sense of fluidity with the work. So like pretty much um, kind of moving away from that sort of rigid structures of like a lot of the pieces you saw earlier and really trying to get more kind of those natural fluid looks especially if like if I'm working with the body and kind of like want to get more I guess like softer features. So and it was around that time where I started playing around with blacksmithing, or I started incorporating blacksmithing techniques to kind of properly shape and manipulate the material. So these are some early examples of like me doing that, where I would just like kind of take um, kind of what I welded together, bring it to the forge, and just kind of like heat it up, and then just hammer away to like kind of get like curves and just like more smoother like contours or textures. And then that kind of culminated in like these sort of hands that I made, as well as like um the sort of can't really see from there, but it's like pretty much like feet or like a pair of legs. And then it was also like around this time where I started, or like around this time where I started thinking more conceptually about like what the work meant, um, as well as like incorporating other material as well. So I started developing a new narrative like around the work, where a lot of the theme was like started to kind of was kind of based off of like spirituality and transformation. Um, especially like just more or less like reflecting of what I was going through at the time. And it was also like around the time where I started assigning like identities to the figures as well, where the ones before didn't really have like a set kind of they weren't really based on anyone versus like these particular pieces where they're very much based off of like either family members or like friends or things of that nature, just like wanting to capture sort of their essence like through like these sculptures. And then just some more examples. So then that all kind of led up to my second year, where I pretty much took like what I had learned from or things that I made from the first year and just kind of like wanted to expand more into it, as well as um, kind of thinking about other mediums, experimenting with other mediums like performance and video. And it was around this time too where the work kind of took like a massive kind of shift in a direction where a lot of it became more centered around grief that I was experiencing, where a lot of the pieces I made were more or less like tributes to folks that had like passed away or that I lost connection with. And it was around this point where it started to feel more, I guess, like fluent in, I guess more in a conceptual way, if that makes sense, where um it started encompassing, or I started putting more of like my sort of personal story back into the work. So like this here is like an example of a piece that's a tribute to a friend and colleague of mine who had suddenly passed away, I think like a little over a year ago, where I made like a memorial piece or constructed a memorial piece. And I also did a performance where I was performing a ritual to kind of express my grief and to also honor like his passing or like to honor his life. And then this is like an example of the installation from Waterfire Arts Center. So playing around with like actually putting like a physical, like creating a physical space for that grief as well. And then just some more examples of work in that similar fashion too. And also like once again, like 2D still being like the sort of primary, it seems like always something that I kind of default back into, like as I continue to expand in other areas. And then as well as like incorporating like reincorporating textiles back into the work as well. And then that all kind of culminated in the summer show from I think back in August, where once again just like kind of really explore like continue exploring like this sort of idea of grief and just like how kind of it takes on different forms, and even like myself just like how I kind of process grief in a lot of ways. So the piece on the left um like kind of perfectly exemplifies that, where it's like a piece about like a family member that had passed, and also like incorporating like heirlooms and things that like once belonged to them that I've kind of always held on to, um, mostly in the hopes of like incorporating it in some way, shape, or form, as well as like kind of, and then it's also like another video piece where is kind of dedicated to this person as well. And just like a close-up shot. And then just some more shots from the show. And then I also want to highlight the legs really quick because this is like also around the time where I started reusing or reincorporating like my own or reusing my own materials and works from the past. So if you remember like these legs are actually like from the piece that I had made in the earlier slides with the kneeling figure, where I kind of took it and just like kind of reworked it or redid it in like in like a new fashion. And that kind of goes into my philosophy when it comes into like the work that I make or like why I choose certain material or objects, where I very much view like the image or the object as not a static thing. Like these things like live and grow and evolve the same way that I do. And it kind of goes into like the age-old question of like, is an art piece ever truly finished? So that's kind of like how I've been reframing like my even like my practice as a whole. So like kind of reincorporating or reusing my own material as well. Just because like I've worked so much with I think reuse like in the past. And then just some more shots from the show. And then just a show from the cohort. And then I'm sure I'm probably over time, so I just want to really quickly wrap up by saying, as far as nowadays, I've kind of pivoted, like post residency, I've pivoted back to mostly 2D, although I've been exploring more video, and then also just a lot of writing and reflecting on my practice, kind of where I want to go next, and also to kind of circle it back to like the the fluidity part of like also just being fluid in my practice and being kind of open to like different mediums and just whatever I can kind of get my hands on or whatever kind of feels right in the moment. And then these are just some still shots from a piece that I'm currently working on. And then just like a write-up that I did recently about it, where I kind of view video as like a direct way of creating a portal. And that kind of carries the viewer through a journey, and through this portal, I kind of view it as like a direct way to commune with the deceased. So that's kind of like my, I guess, like reasoning as to why I've kind of uh, gained like such an interest in video as of late, just based off of like the previous works that I did. And then, yeah, that's about it. I forgot to put my website, but if you just search my name, it'll pop up. But yeah, that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Trey. Oh, I spotlight you so everyone could see you. Stop doing that now. Thanks, Trey. Next we have Nyala Honda. Nyala Honda is a ceramic artist creating work that explores craft through the lens of genre painting. Inspired by mapping, various methodologies, and the concept of personal mythology, she creates collage-like narratives and extended analogies that investigate the ways in which place, secrecy, and disjointedness assert themselves in our relationships and affect our sense of self. Nyala received both her BFA in ceramics and BFA in art education from the Lamar Dodd School of Art at the University of Georgia. She recently finished a 2-year residency in ceramics at the Steelyard and currently lives in Providence, Rhode Island, where she is a post-baccalaureate student in ceramics at UMass Dartmouth.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Nyala Honda. I'm a mixed media artist in ceramics and fibers living and working in Providence, Rhode Island. I primarily work with relational analogies through narrative vessel making and other interdisciplinary explorations, mostly rooted in clay. I moved to Providence in 2023 for the Steelyard residency, actually, after graduating from the University of Georgia, having studied art education and ceramics. In art history, during my undergrad, I started researching expansive definitions of collage, specifically in movement studies. And one of the things I came across was an article about collage through the lens of dance, about the dancer Merce Cunningham, who used dance and the aspect of collage as a way to impose different realities and, in that, do world building. I thought about collage in many ways, and in some of that, it was what different realities and what brings them together. See. Merce Cunningham was involved in Black Mountain College, an institution that captured the idea of deepening understanding of a given medium through interdisciplinary exploration. Unlike other artistic institutions of the time, Black Mountain College equalized design, craft, and fine art, setting a new precedent for makers to expand. I view interdisciplinary models of making to add process of layering and collage in work. Though I view ceramics as the vessel in my work, both metaphorical and physical, the addition of other mediums adds meaning to it. Sometimes I think of my work as short story writing. For me, short stories simultaneously hold fragmentation and wholeness, vignettes and collage. They often begin at a point in the middle of a storyline and finish before the expected end, making an ask of the reader to think about the parts that are not given to them by the writer. Aside from Lenora Carrington, short stories that have inspired me have been by Flannery O'Connor and F. Scott Fitzgerald, probably because they are situated in the American South, specifically Georgia, where I grew up. The stories act as a lens into a specific instance, into a Southern experience for an everyday character, breaking up the perceived homogeneity of the region as lived only by white Southerners, and fragmenting into what it is, a range of people whose Southern everyday varies greatly from person to person. Moving to Providence was an important decision in my growth of an artist, mostly because of the perspective being away from familiarity gave me. My work in undergrad had been rooted in my relationship with my sister and growing up in the South, and moving taught me expansion and nostalgia for a place I wanted to leave. In my time working in ceramics, I have worked both sculpturally and functionally, but center narrative in both modalities. Drawing, symbols, and text have been methods for telling stories or marking where I am. I see my residency work in this way, journalistic and time holding, changing and bending as I did. Defining the stories I wanted to tell happened here as well. I have been drawing about my time growing up in Georgia, considering my own Southern everyday as someone who lived outside of what most people perceive as Southern culture. At times, I viewed my work as an explanation to my family and community growing up of my everyday, the pieces I noticed and held on to, and the pieces I pushed against. It is a translation into modular parts, to me complicating the story of what it means for most folks to be from the American South. Some of my visual morphology is pulled from symbols that I saw and found meaning in growing up in Georgia. Magnolia seeds that meant beginnings, peach pits for strong cores housed within softness, and quilt squares for generational threads. Some symbols have been collected over my time and my experiences outside of the South: greyhounds for social conditioning, shells that grow in spirals for change over time, shadow puppets for falsity. I collect symbols wherever I go, and in doing this, find connection to where I am. During my residency, I was also teaching at an elementary school as an art teacher. Though balancing residency and full-time teaching was a challenge, I found that I learned a lot from my students, which translated into my work. The ways of thinking and creating I asked from them, I asked of myself. The assignments that they had made me think about my own process, and the ways that they approached art changed me very thoroughly. This piece has some of the components from the assignments I gave them, such as self-portraiture, mapping, and symbolic visual vocabulary. Part of the time I was in residency, I was also working in public projects at the Steelyard, which, for those of you who may not be familiar, is the welding fabrication shop part. So if I always say this, but if anyone has seen the colorful bike racks around Providence, those were fabricated in public projects. Tim, John, and T, the public project staff, trained me and allowed me to assist on projects such as the Cape Brown Zoo Park Arch and eventually these residential gates, which I was allowed to design and then fabricate. During this time, I also began incorporating more fiber arts into my work, specifically in the form of quilting. Quilts and their intrinsic relationship to collaging together of contexts and narratives felt appropriate to the work I was making, as well as having ties to the place that I was from. Incorporating ceramic elements into the quilts that I was making opened new channels for the way I was thinking about dimensionality and storytelling. As my time in the residency progressed, I became more centered in the new place that I was and found some rhythm in the ways I was working. I've always loved mathematic and scientific systems and started using relational analogy to tie systems to interpersonal experience. I've enjoyed the way vessel shapes tell a story. In the round, beginning and end are indiscernible, and I like the fact that though I may have a clear starting point in the way that I use symbols and drawings to tell a story, a viewer may have a different beginning, creating a different story. I enjoy collage as a design choice because of this. It is modular and its construction is somewhat influenced by viewer context. This way of thinking became my relationship with the viewer. I prefer analogy to metaphor because it describes what is in the middle instead of what is at each end. Analogy is A is to B, as C is to D. We find the medians of these and find communal meaning. I think of these works as translation and piecing together. A description worked again and again and looked at from different angles to hold an idea. In this body of work, I thought about different ways of connection, 16 of them. Huh? What'd you say?
I think that was somebody else's mic. Sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead. You're
Okay. In this body of work, I thought about 16 ways of connection through simple mechanics and basic joinery, how two things are connected by a screw versus a braid. When those things are undone, what is left over? A braid leaves an imprint of how things were joined, a soft memory rather than an irreparable void. Sometimes we are connected to each other in these same terms. Another concept I explored was refraction and light movement, how things change and shift through lenses, medium, and time. Learning these systems means learning an early iteration of these systems, in this case, early conceptions of optics. We used to think of vision as thin layers of our eyes going out into the world and covering objects, making them something we could see before learning that stimuli exist outside of our bringing them into existence. Often it is the stories from my research about changing paradigms in scientific and mathematical systems that I find inspiring. And looking at this, we see how the ways that we relate to ourselves and to the world around us has changed. We think of scientific and mathematic systems as static, while we think of humans as ever-changing. Holding these entities next to each other reveals something more honest, and in between in which math changes and humans repeat patterns over and over again. At the end of my time in residency, I felt as though I had learned a structure to work from, a warp thread that could hold concept and stories that I had not thought of yet. Being in community with other makers who are exploring telling their stories through creative practice helped me achieve flexibility and stability in my work that I'm very grateful for today. Currently, I'm working in the education department at the Steelyard, and I'm in a post-baccalaureate degree at UMass Dartmouth studying ceramics. The core of my creative practice, something that I found in residency, has stayed and made room for different ideas and approaches to orbit around it. Thank you.
Great. So next we have Anne Irving. Anne Pine Irving is a Providence-based artist and maker traditionally trained in jewelry and metalsmithing at the University of the Arts Craft and Materials Department in Philadelphia. She found a resonance with the technical precision, bodily choreography, and material demands specific to each craft medium. Following the closing of the department, she continued on to receive her BFA in jewelry and metalsmithing from the Rhode Island School of Design. Her practice is drawn towards precious metals and biological ephemera for their intrinsic themes of grasping, possession, potential, and desire.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Um, okay, so hi, I'm Anne. I held the Steelyard Alloy Fellowship between 2024 and 2025. Um, so I came to jewelry after trying a couple different craft mediums, and I think the thing that really drew me into jewelry specifically is that like the choreography of your hands is there's the bench pin right in front of you, and it really centers your focus to like millimeters of space. But also a driving interest in jewelry as a medium is maybe my relationship with like interpersonal connection. And jewelry has this specific language that directly speaks to A, like ownership or historically property rights, and B, it's like partnership and mutual reliance or institutionalized reciprocity or maybe lack thereof. Um, and so this is a signet ring. Oh, yeah, it's a signet ring. They're used historically to sign legal documents on like clay tablets where you like press, make impressions, and usually those documents pertained to like the purchasing of land. And so the tradition of like an engagement ring grew out of the use of rings as a mark of like a finished business deal of sorts. And so jewelry as a medium, like, is a site to work out the gripes with how one is to balance desire for connection while acknowledging role-related identity structures. And so I wanted to share a couple pieces that I made before the Steelyard that ultimately ended up guiding the work that I made when I was there. And the structure of this whole thing, I'm just going to kind of go through everything I made. So quick exposition. My mother grew up in a town outside of Hong Kong during the Cultural Revolution. So, and she put a personal ad out when she was like, I don't know, 20, 21. And my father replied to it, and he was this like white man who grew up on the East Coast and surely symbolized some degree of financial and social security. And so I've always lived with this understanding or perception or like belief that the safety that she sought was a certain kind of safety, but also she had traded some kind of freedom away from it. So, um, yeah, and she moved to the US and raised a family. And I made this cage piece. It's only a couple inches tall. Thinking about this like pappus or like dandelion's seed and its purpose to like travel and find fertile ground, to take root and grow, being kept as like a bird or maybe even like nurtured with nuance. And that piece I think was like technically challenging for like my soldering hands, but also like a little demoralizing conceptually. So I found that in like the narrative of my practice, every time there's like a restriction or a capturing, I want to turn it again into some kind of release. So the next exposition thing is I was like sitting next to this window at some point and noticed this feather like of a young bird, so it was like fluffy. It was like tangled in a window screen, and I pulled it out and tied it to a piece of hair, and it like floated and kind of drifted, and that was a release enough and for that moment. And so when I got to the yard, I wanted to change the way I was working. I wanted to explore scale. So one of the first things I was making was this plinth, maybe that's the word, column plinth thing that used this updraft to give the piece a little bit more movement, and let it kind of dance on its spot. Um, yeah. And so that was kind of my jumping off point for the show that we did at the Waterfire Gallery. So I also shifted to work with some found objects and slash assemblage work, because that was just like the quickest way to like completely blow myself out of jewelry scale. And so I was thinking about that like milkweed pappus and how it uses like updrafts to propel its direction. So I was generally thinking about the upward trajectory, and the ladder was a way that that idea was like symbolically manifested. And so this was a collage of objects that kind of like came together before me, and I was kind of perplexed by this because like in the moment of this like ascension there and like assumed progress, there was this another barrier that like appeared on its perch. Um, and I think at that point I was thinking about Yoko Ono's ceiling slash yes painting. You would climb this ladder and find this tiny yes on the ceiling. And I think about that as a model for, I guess, optimism or something. So I looked to Grapefruit for her book for the title for the piece and named it Soprano Against the Sky. Um, yeah, because in my like perception of this piece, you can kind of like almost hear their desire. These little like papaces like desire for like airborne state. And so in this like reach for optimism or this movement upwards, there's like yet again a capture and it's kind of restriction that followed. So I started to question how much control I had over this perception of the like soprano and like the character of the soprano in my mind being a cage character in the narrative of my work and how much I really wanted to identify with that gesture. Um, and at that point, I think I was reading a collection of essays by Siri Hansfit. She parses through her experience of looking at de Kooning's woman, and arriving at the thought that she is of me, I am not of her. Um, and I guess at that point, I was trying to parse through my own self-perception as it pertained to like femininity and questioning what patriarchal intonation had made it into my own understanding of myself. So I got this little cage and wove this net and showed it to itself to see how much of the desire or like capture or the tendency to assume a sort of trappedness came from maybe a stirring of discomfort. Um, yeah. So all of this assemblage work, I was like, this is out of the way I usually work. I was thinking about the linear elements and how they rely on the network of forces and barriers that expose one to penalty. Um, and the symbol and the function of the cage led me to think of the jewelry trope of the puzzle ring, of which I made 55. It's a ring made up of any number of interlacing wires that form a braid. The story is that some Turkish oligarch wanted to commission a ring that you could tell if it was taken off. So the braid falls apart into individual rings when and like takes certain maneuvering to align them back into an interlaced state. So I guess in this piece I wanted to revisit my training in jewelry. Um, because the assemblages prior were always kind of in reference to the function of the jewelry that I'm like always wrestling with. It's that like tension between the grasp of comfort and the grasp of enclosure or capture. Um, and I guess at that point I felt like the whole thing had become really focused on enclosure. And so I wanted to think of like instances where there's like a physical connection or tetheredness that's freeing instead of kind of oppressive. Um, So borrowing from the language of jewelry was helpful here in that the typical ring band, like a ring has a part that engages with the hand, which is the band. And then there's like a focus object on top of it. And I wanted to like maybe add some distance between those two instances. So I landed on making kites. This was my first, test piece material exploration, pinned like a moth on a board. Um, I enjoy the way that like format also stretched my definition of what I could do within a jewelry context. I was looking at references of traditional Chinese kites and saw these three swallows emerge over and over. And with the installation, there are these three metaphorical cages dispersed throughout the space, and I wanted to, in some way, negate their hold. So this was the kite. Um, Yeah, so that was everything in the first show. At the artist panel, I was asked what's next, and I got to like take a step back, and I felt maybe that like just formally the whole thing was kind of really light and focused on the upward, and I wanted to know what the other side of that was for me, and so I decided to try to like shift my focus to maybe what lies beneath, or I don't know, downward. It was kind of like a loose prompt for myself. Um, so I started off in the next show looking at the previous show, and there were these like the thing that was great about being able to show was that there's these moments that I didn't intend for, and like these beautiful shadows emerged, and the cages would like cast them on the walls. And so I started in the next show trying to fabricate that shadow. And so I made this for the next one. This was upside down hanging cage that held maybe like five or six moth cocoons. So it's another like iteration of like the object of potential that like would, change into something new. And so over the past couple of years, I've had the practice of rearing moths, and maybe it's like a time marker, but they like feed for a couple weeks in the summer and cocoon over winter and emerge again. Um, So I named this one Vivarium as Impasse, and it's about like 4 feet tall. It's the biggest thing I've ever made as a jeweler, and I owe that push out of my typical way of making to the encouragement of the people at the Steelyard, and I got a lot of help. Um, yeah. So this thing was in conversation, you know, was in conversation with an object I cast at the iron pour. It was this like candle holder chamber stick. Um, and I wanted to stay with the idea of like the distance between the hand engagement thing and the focus object. So the hand engagement being the um, chamber stick holder, and then the like flame being the focus object. And like stretch what that manipulation could be applied to. And so I made this tall candle, and it like hovers just out of reach of these like soon to be moths within the shadow. It's like some barrier to a dangerous desire. And so this was like a game I played with myself where I tried to figure out like what recognizable objects have the criteria of like a hand engagement and like distance in a focus object. So that's how I ended up making this marionette. Um, it was made out of the wings of the moth from the last generation. So presumably like the parent of the the moth that's in the shadow. Um, and used the same bamboo as the kites that I was making. And so it's like a carcass of one of these moths still like enacting desire towards this flame. Um, yeah, so I'd gone small, did tiny kite, and I wanted to blow the scale up again. So I made this one last big kite, and um, had the string rooted into a hole, which I didn't get a picture of. But I think in making kites, there's like this question of like, if this is a free flying agent, like who is at the bottom of the rope? And I didn't have an answer to that question. So I kind of like anchored it in a place that was unseen. Yeah. Yeah, that's everything I made at my time at the Steelyard. What's next right now, I think in this line of thought is I'm looking at a bunch of kite reels, seeing like what the like site of engagement with the hand looks like for me. Um, yeah, that's sorry, sis. Thank you.
Our last and not least, Donna Heng. Donna Heng is an interdisciplinary artist based in Providence, Rhode Island. Her creative practice is both social and introspective, inspired by familiar and everyday objects from her upbringing in a Khmerican household and through contrasting experiences in DIY and queer subculture. These snapshots are generative sites for making, producing themes of gender, labor, immigration, disidentity, and diaspora. Reflecting upon these themes, her work manifests across disciplines as ceramics, printed matter, or sorry, manifests across disciplines as ceramics, printed matter, edible concoctions, and gathering, always thinking about the relational quality of the objects and/or performance. She works intuitively, firstly aiming to connect with people through direct, matter-of-fact visual style. The process of her practice is ever expanding with an evolving intentionality in response to changes in her hyperlocal environment.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. My name is Donna. Um, I am going to tell you about a little my journey. Um, so I've always been interested in art about, well, I guess this wasn't like an intention. I feel like a lot of my practice is very, very just like being present. It's almost kind of like a meditation on like what's going on, what's my experience, what am I seeing. Um, so this first image is of me, these images, cooking, because I've always had an interest in shared space and making art around bringing people together. This has just also been my experience growing up. My house, or like my grandma's house where I was at a lot when I was young, was just always full of people. We always had like big dinner parties that lasted. I mean, it wasn't even dinner, it was just like an all day like food event. People coming in and out. So it felt, I was surrounded by this. It felt really natural for me um to explore that experience. And like I went to college and was in I went to college in Vermont, so very um, you know, co-ops, food oriented, very communal. And so spaces like that like really informed the way that I wanted to be and like how I wanted to keep building relationships and like be in space with other people to make cool things. So in the next slide, haha, look, it's baby me. So I was at the Steelyard in, these are pictures from like 2009 through 2011. Um, I was so part of like where I come from and like who I am, which informs the work, which is like another like tension that I play with sometimes or that I feel some type of way about that I'm trying to get over, is this like coming being raised in art spaces that are mentor based, in community with people of multiple across generations. So I was at the Steelyard as a student in like the camp metalhead, and they did the Iron Chef at one point, so we were doing this competition. um and then I was also at New Urban Arts, where I work today, where I'm currently at. And then the bottom photo is, I couldn't find a photo of me at AS220, but when they started their Fab Lab, I was one of the first students, and me and my really good friend Simca made like light up fabric sculptures. And at prom, she wore the dress and I wore a corsage. Anyway, these places really instilled this value I have in of being in like creative spaces with peers and mentors. Next slide. So huge part of my life gets poured into my work at New Urban Arts as a manager of artist mentors. So um, as I said earlier, I was a student here. You can hit next for the animation and next. You can't really see it well, but it's like a screenshot of a publication of like a summer program that I was in when I was a teenager, and I made like jewel cases. And then next is just like a funny painting I made as a mentor. So being here like real allowed me to just, well, to be resourceful, because a lot of the materials that I used um and still do use are kind of what's available and what I see in like, I guess, material culture I made jewel cases because when you're a teenager, you're like your identity is your music that you listen to. Um, and then like also trying to instill that with students, like we can make art about with like cheap stuff, you know, like that ethos, which is also like related to Bread and Puppet, which is like near where I went to school, like make cheap art, just make things, be creative. Um, what was I saying? So yeah, also like when I came back as a mentor, now I'm a mentor to mentors. And it's like a really strange place to be in right now, but it feels like really in line with um with I guess thinking about like intergenerational um art making, intergenerational learning, and um yeah, that kind of thinking. Also like working with youth has been like a huge lesson, like constantly in 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 the destruction of my ego, and also trying to treat myself as a one of my students, like thinking not destroying my ego so far that I'm like no longer existent, but then remembering that I'm also young Donna, and that I need the care and encouragement to keep making. Um Next slide. Um yes, when I came back to Providence after college, I got commissioned to do a sidewalk, a ground mural, which is not something I've ever done before. I forget why I was why the city um reached out to me, but they found me. And coincidentally, this was on a corner of the street where my parents had a laundromat. It's broad and public street. Um and the turnaround for this project was so quick, and I like had no time to really think about what I was gonna do. But sometimes that like immediacy and like being in the moment, it really forces me to like just tap into what I know, like an intuitive, like yeah, it's like an intuitive thing. So I was just like, I guess I'm painting a cathedral, which is like it's a sedge mat, woven mat that many cultures use. Cambodian households, we use them as like a multi-purpose mat in like a room. You might not have like a dining room or a living room that's like separate from each other. It's like a communal space. The mat is put down. You eat on it. It's like your dining table. It's like the place you hang out. It's where you like play with your toys. So I made a painting of that. Um, yeah. Next. And I think this is, oh yeah, that's me. And then next slide. I applied for my first residency when I was that in 2018, I believe. And so this is the Rizzi Museum's fellowship. I guess it's not a residency, it's a fellowship. And I think it's called the Research Fellowship now. But at the time it was just you can use the archives of the museum and do research and do whatever you want. So I was thinking about heirlooms, and um realizing like in my experience, like what kind of heirlooms do we have in my family? Not very much. We don't have a lot of objects. Um, but the heirlooms that we do have were like tradition, um, and food, things that were passed down orally or like through practice and cooking with each other. So I made these like prototypes of soft sculpture. These are really bad photos. I lost some photos in a computer situation, so sorry, but here's what I have. And they're soft sculptures that were I was thinking about like um about these drying like kind of like dehydrators. You'd like marinate a meat, you'd put it in there, dehydrate them in the sun. And I was thinking about them as like bodies. And in this installation, I had visitors to the museum come in and like respond to prompts that were, I don't have the questions on me, but they were like about um they were about, I think they were just reflection prompts, but they were on butcher paper and India ink, and I had people dry them in the baskets. Um, sorry, I forgot the prompts. The next slide. Um, so this was in 2020. Things stopped. I couldn't really do anything. Many people couldn't do anything, including getting access to food. So to get myself like motivated, I reached out to people in the community to get this sidewalk fridge going. Um, and sorry, I'm like losing my notes. Yeah, we got a bunch of people together. And I feel like this was like a big, I don't treat this as like an art project. This is like just something that needed to happen. And again, like in my practice, there's a lot of just like response immediacy and like what's going on in my community that needs to happen. So that's that. Next slide. I'm gonna go fast through these. So, after, I mean, through the pandemic, the Interlace grant started and I applied and um, did this project with a collaborator of mine, Moy Chong. Um, and we were doing separate projects at the time, and I found during this time it was really difficult. I had originally proposed to write a book, which is kind of a crazy project proposal. And so that didn't happen. But I ended up, so it was really hard for me because like working in isolation is like not easy for me. So I was talking to Moy about our projects, and Moy was working on stuff that was very similar in theme to mine. So we ended up collaborating on some like happenings to invite people in to see our work. And I had been working on, at the time, I was my grandma's primary caregiver during lockdown time. So I was learning a lot about cooking traditional food. So I made her one of her favorite dishes, and we ended up doing this pop-up for Cambodian New Year, um, and had an altar that Moy made, and I made these noodles that were free and did these flyers. And the next slide, um, this is everyone there. Yay. And then the next animation, I made like these little joss paper looking things that were just kind of informational of the noodles, ingredients, and kind of just a token. So like people could take this object when they left, or they could burn it if they want to. But yeah, it was a free event. It was just a way to like give back to people. Next slide. So Moy and I continued to collaborate. This was a second installation for the Interlace project. And we did this installation at the Providence Public Library, which was this place that we were like, this is a gallery that is giving, like, letting us kind of like have free reign in a different way. Like most galleries wouldn't really let you bring in certain objects. So this gallery was super chill. They're like, we've never done a show before. You can be, or like they maybe were starting to do shows there, and we were like one of the first groups. And so they let us experiment a lot, and it was really cool to work with them. And the objects that were like questionable for regular gallery spaces are this stack of boxes, which I collected from two of my aunt's grocery stores in Providence. So like this whole show is named after my parents' grocery store, which used to be on the corner of Public and Elmwood. And it's called Newt Mong Market. So call back to family business, and also, which is also a callback to their homeland. And so we were doing this show that was like around the aesthetics of our Southeast Asian households growing up. And I made these prints, and you can't really see them in the glass case, but there's ceramics that I made, little ceramics during my micro residency at the Steelyard. And you can do the next animation. And this is a close-up of a pot that Moy and I collaborated on with a lime leaf tree. And I drew some like sketches of like old family photos. Next slide. These are close-ups of the first trivet, ceremonial trivet, and betel boxes that I made that were inside of that glass case, which were made during my time at the Steelyard micro residency. Then next slide. Then I continued to think about that form of the offering dish. And so these are two shows that they were in. The first one is the Steelyards show, and then the second one was a Cambodian American show that we did at ASU 20. Next slide. And lastly, the most recent thing that I'd worked on was like one of the biggest, or the most I guess what's the word? The most high profile thing that I've ever done, which was the Providence Commemoration lab, which I did in collaboration with Moy again. So we were tasked to make commemorative artworks for the site of Public Street, which is like a huge street, so many neighborhoods. And so our focus was to think about, we wanted to focus on honoring foodways, immigrant foodways of people who are currently living there, not just people who were there over time, like not just our ancestors, but people who are here today. So this planter was installed at the Maddie Smith Tot Lot to honor Maddie Smith, a local civil rights leader, and a co-founder of DARE, the direct, oh, I'm forgetting my words, the direct, why am I oh my God, I'm embarrassed. DARE Providence. It's Direct Action for Rights and Equality, which is in the South Side. And next animation, or next slide. These are just other views of the piece. So at the park, we spoke with the granddaughter of Maddie Smith, who is pictured in this drawing, as a young person, and she remembered the park being like, before it was redone, after Maddie Smith had like fought the city for getting playgrounds done for children. It used to be overrun with like these plants there, rhubarb. There's wild rhubarb growing everywhere. So we decided to include that in the planter. Next one. This was just a representation of the founding of DARE, which was around Maddie Smith's kitchen table. There was 5 founders. You can go to the next one. And lastly, I made planters for Bree and Sata, descendants of Maddie Smith, who hold a Sunday soup every Sunday, rain or shine, at the Southside Cultural Center. I made these planter boxes, herb boxes, with like paintings at their request of different medicinal herbs. And now I'm done and I'm taking kind of a break from external art making and just trying to play a little bit more. And so this was last year, and right now I'm chilling. And that's the end of my slideshow.
Yay. Thank you, Donna. And thank you to Traé and Anne and Nyala also for speaking. You guys are actually really great on time. I think every person was like pretty much there, which is great. It's great to see everybody's work in this format. It's nice to get to spend a little bit longer time with everything that people are making. And also great work, Anne, Traé, Nyala, Donna.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you for coming.